Okay. All right. Yep, that's what we need. Okay. Well, we're gonna have 32 footnotes too. Okay, our father in sorrow to Sheol.
Start with the footnotes.
Oh,
Let's start with the footnotes.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
read the last.
I guess we did it all the way to
chapter 44. First footnote.
okay. Okay. Put each man silver in the mouth of his bag. This detail is a small puzzle because nothing is made of the discovery of the silver when
Major
Jordan,
Dumo.
yeah, thank you, searches through the bag. These seeming indiscrepancy has led critics to write off the return of the silver as a later addition made to harmonize this episode with the one in chapter 42. But that is by no means a necessary conclusion. Thank you. Joseph's scheme, after all, is to make the brothers feel they are trapped in a network of uncanny circumstances they neither control nor explain. A repetition of the device of returning the silver would nicely serve this purpose. The Major Domo, however, is exclusively focused on the retrieval of a particular silver object, the divining goblet, and so does not even deign to mention the weight of the silver in the bags, as though their appearance there was a matter of course. Whatever consternation it might cause the brothers. Meanwhile, as in a dream logic, or perhaps one should say guilt logic, the brothers who once took silver when they sold Joseph down into Egypt seem helpless to return the silver to Egypt as much as they try. The return of silver, moreover, makes the purported stealing of the silver goblet look all the more heinous.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that? I guess you would kind of feel trapped if all these things out of your control are taking place, and you know that they're putting you in the bottom of a pit. And my goblet, the silver goblet, the double formation highlights both the fact that the goblet is Joseph's special possession and that it is made of silver. They and their donkeys, again, the donkeys are tracked into the end of the sentence. Tacked into the end, perhaps because the donkeys are carrying the packs, which will have to be set down on the ground and then reloaded. Verses 11 and 12, and in one of which the goblet has been secreted. Okay. It is not
Secreted.
secreted. Okay, thank you. A different pronunciation. Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks and which he always divines? The fact that the goblet is referred to only by a demonstrative pronoun, the one from which may reflect a flaunting of the assumption that, as all concerned should recognize, the only thing at issue here is the goblet. The brothers may well have seen Joseph drink from the goblet at the dinner the day before, whereas its use for divination would have been news to them. The probable mechanism of divination in a goblet would be to interpret patterns on the surface of the liquid, it contained or in drops running down its sides. Divination would have been a plausible activity on the part of a member of the high Egyptian bureaucracy with its technology of soothsaying, but the emphasis it is given here is also linked with Joseph's demonstrated ability to predict the future and his superiority of knowledge in relation to his brothers. Well, I've heard of reading tea leaves.
That's what they're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, 9 of he of your servants with whom it be found shall die. This pronouncement of a death sentence for stealing may be excessive in relation to the standards of ancient Near East law, though Gerhard von Rad has proposed that stealing a sacred object would have been deemed a capital crime. The brothers' words are quite similar to those spoken by their father to Laban. Before he rummaged through the belongings of Jacob's wives in search of his missing household gods. It is a teasing parallel with crucial differences. Laban does not find what he is looking for, but the death sentence pronounced on the actually guilty party, Benjamin's mother Rachel, appears to be carried out later when she dies bearing him. And we shall become slaves to our Lord. This gratuitous additional condition reflects of their perfect confidence in their innocence of the theft, carries forward the greater theme of moral restitution. The brothers who sold Joseph into slavery now offer themselves as slaves. The term Eved means both servant and slave, and the speeches in this episode pointedly play to the two meanings against each other. When the brothers refer to themselves as your servants, they are clearly using courtly language of self-abasement. When Judah offers to be slaves, they are proposing to surrender their freedom and enter into a condition of actual servitude. Okay, even so, as by your words, let it be. These first words of response by the Majordomo may constitute a
Major Domo, the sergeant major.
A what?
Major Domo. Think of it as the sergeant major.
Okay,
Major Domo.
Okay, may constitute a kind of bureaucrat or a legal flourish. He begins by seeming to concur in the stern sentence the brothers have pronounced on themselves, should the goblet be found among them. But having accepted the principle they enunciated, that the guilty party should be punished, and a distinction made between him and his brothers, the major domo modifies the sentence to make it more reasonable. The guilty brother will be made a slave and the others allowed to go free. 14, and Judah with his brothers came. The Hebrew says Judah and his brothers, but uses a characteristic grammatical device, a verb conjugated in the singular instead of the plural. They indicate that the first stated noun, Judah, is the principal agent, the thematically focused subject of the verb. In a moment, Judah will step forward and become the spokesman for all the brothers, the ringing voice of their collective conscience. Did you not know that a man like me would surely divine? Like much else in this story, Joseph's words are contrived to yield a double meaning. He is saying that he should have known that a person of his standing would practice divination, and so the goblet they purloined,
Purloined,
say it
Took.
again,
purloined, to be
Purloined.
taken. They took it.
purloined, they stole, was no mere silver cup, but a dedicated instrument of divination. But in keeping with the sustained theme of his knowledge and his brother's ignorance, he also suggests that a man of his powers would be able to divine such a theft and its perpetrator.
Be careful.
Okay. Interesting that we're in divination here. God has found out your servant's crime. In this case, the double meaning expresses a buried psychological dimension in Judah's plea to Joseph. On the surface, he is simply conceding guilt as his own recourse because one of his brothers has been caught with the evidence and he has no counter argument to offer. But he speaks out of the consciousness of a real guilt incurred by him and his brothers more than 2 decades earlier. Compare their response at this first detection, 42:21. And thus expresses a real sense that God has at last extracted retribution for that act of fraternal betrayal. He, of course, cannot guess that the man whom he is addressing perfectly understands both references. One should note that the guilt is assumed by Judah in the first person plural and is not restricted to the one in whose hand the goblet was found. Here we are, slaves to my Lord. And again, an unconscious principle of retribution asserts itself. The 10 whom condemned Joseph to slavery offer themselves as slaves to him together with Benjamin, in whose hand the goblet was found. In fact, it was found in the mouth of his bag, but they reiterate image. No. How do we pronounce that? Reiterated?
Reiterated.
Image of the hand holding the goblet links up with all the previous focusing on hands in the story and stresses the idea of agency and responsibility. 17, he shall become my slave. This is, of course, the last turn of the screw in Joseph's testing of his brothers. Well, will they allow Rachel's other son to be enslaved as they did her elder son, an aged father and a young child of his old age? The phrase suggests the intimate connection between the father and the child, aged and old age, as well as Benjamin's vulnerability as the youngest. The Hebrew for young also means little. His brother being dead, he alone is left of his mother and his father loves him. Either Judah assumes that after more than 20 years of slavery in a foreign land, Joseph is likely to be dead, or he states Joseph's absence as death for the sake of rhetorical simplicity, to make clear that the son is irrevocably lost to his doubting father. What is remarkable is that now Judah can bring himself out of the concern for his old father to accept the painful fact of paternal favoritism, and his father loves him. That was the root of the brothers' hostility to Joseph. That I might set my eyes on him. This phrase, which is in other contexts can mean something like showing royal favor towards someone, and which for Joseph has the personal meaning of wanting to behold his full brother, momentarily seems to have been given a sinister twist by the course of events. The lad cannot leave his father. Although Benjamin is considerably beyond adolescence, lad, as in the number of other noticeable occurrences, is a designation that suggests tenderness and perhaps the vulnerability of the person so designated. And Judah also uses it here because Benjamin is the youngest. Joseph, it should be noted, had coldly referred to the purportedly guilty Benjamin as the man. Should he leave his father, he will die. The translation reflects the ambiguity of the Hebrew. One may be skeptical of the often made claim that the second he must refer to Jacob. It seems more likely that this is a studied ambiguity on Judah's part. He leaves it to Joseph to decide whether the old man would die if he were separated from Benjamin, or whether Benjamin could not survive without his father, or whether both dire possibilities might be probable. Go back, buy us some food. Judah quotes Jacob's words to his sons. Verbatim, the report of this response in the next verse is more appropriate, a more appropriate quotation. Two did my wife bear me, in Judah's report. Jacob speaks characteristically as though Rachel was his own wife. Judah appears now to accept this outrageous favoritism as part of what his father is, part of the father he must still love. He has been torn to shreds, and I have not seen him since. In the first clause, Jacob is represented as quoting verbatim his actual response to Joseph's supposed death. Yet the second clause has the look of clinging to the hope that Joseph has merely disappeared but has not been killed. When he saw the lad was not with us. The Mosaic text lacks with us, though it is reflected in the Septuagint and in one version of the Samaritan Bible. Okay. 32, for your servant became pledged. Judah then proceeds to quote the actual formula of his pledge of security to Jacob. As many commentators have noted, his invocation of his pledge is a way of explaining why he should have put himself forward as a spokesman for the brothers. Let your servant pay, stay instead of the lad as a slave. Judah, who conceived the plan of selling Joseph into slavery, now comes around 180 degrees by offering himself as slave in place of Benjamin. Let us see not the evil that would find out my father. This, of course, stands in stark contrast to his willingness years before to watch his father wither in anguish over Joseph's supposed death. The entire speech, as these concluding words suggest, is at once a moving piece of rhetoric and the expression of a profound inner change. Joseph's testing of his brothers is thus also a process that induces the recognition of guilt and leads to a psychological transformation. Okay, well, those are the footnotes. Tell me, when we read it the first time, did you get that out of it?
No, not at all. This divination thing is totally new.
Well, we went from
Well, yeah, it's,
dream reading to
yeah, it's a,
divination. Go ahead.
it's a new piece, but, you know, it kind of reflects, I mean, you know, Joseph having this special divination goblet. I mean, yeah, like Susan said, that was kind of a surprise, but on the other hand, it wasn't, because, I mean, Joseph and like Daniel were looked to for their, you know, for their abilities to divine, to foresee, to interpret dreams. And then there's cultures, there wasn't a lot of difference between, well, I know for centuries, there wasn't a lot of difference in these cultures between astronomy and astrology, for example. That went on for a long time in history. And even today, in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, Orthodox priests are always cautioning the congregation to not get involved in, you know, tea leaf reading or card readings, or especially the evil eye. The evil eye is kind of a big thing in the Near East. They're always cautioning, you know, the congregation, the parishioners, not to go there, not to get involved in that stuff. And why are they doing it? Because there's a lot of it going on, right? So the you know, in these cultures, there's just a lot of that going on. But as Susan said, the special divination goblet, that was kind of a, you know, that was kind of new.
Okay, and the the way that it is being used to make the offense that much more serious. Okay, let's go on then.
Wait a minute.
Well, I had one other question or reflection. This
Okay.
discussion of servitude and slavery, I take it, you know, without reading ahead and trying to recall, it somehow sets the stage for the enslavement of the Hebrew people. And am I getting like way ahead of myself, or is that kind of the slippery slope?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, that's slavery was, you know, that's what you did with captives. So,
Sure, but I mean, where you have the Hebrew people that Moses led out of captivity,
yeah,
where you have this entire ethnic group enslaved under the pharaohs. Did this episode with Joseph and his brothers kind of offering to sell themselves into servitude, did that somehow set the stage or open the floodgates for that, or is that just, you know,
No, I
much
don't-
later?
I think that's much later.
Okay.
You know, that this all happens by a pharaoh who did not know Joseph. No, I think what you are is in the culture of slavery, or we're having slaves. Okay. Anybody else? Before we go. All right. Susan, you want to flip up the next chapter? Okay, chapter 45. Buddy, you want to take that?
Okay. And Joseph could no longer hold himself in check before all who stood attendant upon him. And he cried, "Clear out everyone around me." And no man stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh's heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed before him. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me, pray." And they came close, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be pained, and do not be incensed with yourselves that you sold me down here, because for sustenance God has sent me before you. 2 years now there's been famine in the heart of the land, and there are yet 5 years without plowing and harvest. And God has sent me before you to make you a remnant on earth and to preserve life, for you to be a great surviving group. And so it is not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me father to Pharaoh. He has made me father to Pharaoh and Lord to all his house. Father to Pharaoh, that's an odd phrase. He has made me father to Pharaoh and Lord to all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord to all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay, and you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and shall be close to me, you and your sons, and the sons of your sons, and your flocks, and your cattle, and all that's yours. And I will sustain you there. For yet 5 years of famine remain, lest you lose all, you and your household, and all that's yours. And look, your own eyes can see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my very mouth that speaks to you. And you must tell my father all my glory in Egypt, and all that you have seen. And hurry, and bring down my father here. And he fell upon the neck of his brother Benjamin, and he wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that his brothers spoke with him. And the news was heard in the house of Pharaoh, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. It was good in Pharaoh's eyes and in his servants' eyes. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, this now do, load up your beasts and go, return to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come back to me, that I may give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall live off the fat of the land. And you command them, this now do, take you from the land of Egypt wagons for your little ones and your wives, and convey your father and come, and regret not your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. And so the sons of Israel did. And Joseph gave them wagons, as Pharaoh had ordered, and he gave them supplies for their journey. To all of them, each one he gave changes of garments, and to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent as follows 10 donkeys conveying from the best of Egypt, and 10 she-asses conveying grain and bread and food for his father for the journey. And he sent off his brothers, and they went. And he said to them, do not be perturbed on the journey. And they went up from Egypt, and they came to the land of Canaan, Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and that he was ruler in all the land of Egypt. And his heart stopped. For he did not believe them, and he spoke to them all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them. And he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to convey him, and the spirit of Joseph their father revived. And Israel said, enough, Joseph my son is still alive. Let me go see him before I die. So that's the end of chapter 45.
Okay. Well, let's do the footnotes, and then we'll talk about this whole thing. And he wept aloud. The Hebrew says literally, and he gave his voice in weeping. This is the third climatic weeping of Joseph. Now he no longer turns aside to weep in secret, but sobs uncontrollably in the presence of his brothers, so audibly that he is heard by the Egyptians outside and heard all the way to the palace. Of Pharaoh, as an English house may refer either to the physical structure or to the people associated with it. Any comment on that?
Well, my dad used to weep. He was the first one to always start crying when we were with our relatives. I think he's weeping is he weeping in joy or weeping in sorrow or what?
I think it's just overcome with emotion, a very emotional reunion there.
He's certainly surprised. I'm sure it's surprising himself, the flood of emotions that he had there.
Well, that's what usually happens if you're overcome with emotion.
Mm.
So they say. And then the Pharaoh heard him, or somebody told him that he was weeping. Is Joseph, did he live in the Pharaoh's house?
Well, yeah, let's,
Huh?
I doubt that. Okay, because you've got the Joseph's brothers who are non-Egyptian in the house.
Or in the palace? He lives in the Pharaoh's palace.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I would think. Yeah.
Well, I think that it's the Pharaoh's people. I wouldn't think Joseph would be given all that responsibility and like without the Pharaoh having a direct line of communication as to what's going on. This is what I would understand. So that this weeping that they were talking about or what's going on, I'm sure there was a question, what is this all about? Why is Joseph spending this time with these people that he normally doesn't do this with all the different people that have been coming to get grain? I mean, this is a tremendous amount of time that he's been spending with these people. And the first pickup on it would have been, these people are not really good people. Just a minute. I'm in the middle of Bible class. Call back later after 11. So I think that's a situation.
So that getting back to that divination, if that's how you pronounce it a little bit, that's also considered a term that's used for prophecy. Is that correct?
Well, no,
Huh?
divination, they had a lot to do with going after telling things, but it's really occultic type of action. Israel is told to stay out of that. Don't do it. And that's where Saul, when he goes after the witch Endora to tell the future, he has gone directly against the orders that he's been told that he's not to do. You're not going to God for your guidance, you're going to the devil, basically. So, but the divination is something like that. Torah cards, seance, Ouija boards, that kind of stuff. And as I understand it, it opens up a channel communication. So do drugs.
Well, let's go back a little further when Joseph was interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams.
When he was interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams, we don't hear him using some type of device. And he says God is the one that can interpret dreams. So you have to interpret that as God giving him the answer, the ability to see and make sense out of the dream. Okay.
Well, yeah, but I see a pattern here. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I think because we know that it was in their culture and alike, that that would have been what they would have expected. And so Joseph's just using that idea. It was really just to compound all of the problems, and to put them under great stress to find out where they were and whether they had changed from when he was first with them. And obviously from the answers we got, he did. Okay, let's go to the next footnote then.
You want me to read?
Yeah, why don't you take that up?
Okay, number 3, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His very first utterance after his sobs have subsided is the essential revelation of identity. A 2-word in the Hebrew bombshell tossed at his brothers. He follows this by asking whether his father is alive, as though he could not altogether trust the assurances they had given him about this when he questioned them in his guise of Egyptian viceroy. His repeated reference to my father serves double duty. The first person singular possessive expresses his sense of personal connection with old Jacob. He is, after all, my father, he is saying to his brothers. But it is also idiomatic usage for the familiar father in biblical Hebrew, rather like Abba in Aramaic and later Hebrew. You always remember the quote, Pastor, in Star Wars when Darth Vader said, or he said, Luke, I'm your father.
I remember. If
Not to,
I remember correctly, he falls down a big hole.
Pharaoh, I am your father.
okay, number 4. And Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me, pray. The pure blindness to which a mechanical focus on source criticism can lead is nowhere more vividly illustrated than in the contention of some critics that this verse reflects a different source from the preceding verse because it is a doublet of it. Okay, the doublet would be
It said it twice, right, doublet.
a double. Okay. What should be obvious is that this repeated speech is a brilliant realization of the dramatic moment when Joseph first reveals himself to his brothers. They are, quite understandably, dismayed.
Shocked.
Yeah, well, yeah. And so he must speak again, first asking them to draw close. The proposal of the Midrash Bereshit rabbi, okay, that he invites them to come close in order to show them that he is circumcised is, of course, fanciful. But the closing of physical space does reflect his sense that he must somehow bridge the enormous distance he has maintained between himself and them and his Egyptian persona. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. The qualifying clause Joseph now adds to his initial, I am Joseph, is surely a heart stopper for the brothers and could be construed as the last inadvertent gesture of his test of them. Their most dire imaginings of retribution could easily follow from these words. Yeah, now he's really going to drop the bomb on us here. But instead, Joseph immediately proceeds in the next sentence to reassure them. Number 5, do not be incensed with yourselves. The literal Hebrew wording is, let it not be incest in your eyes. For sustenance, God has sent me before you. Joseph's speech is a luminous illustration of the Bible's double system of causation, human and divine. Commentators have tended to tilt the balance to one side, making Joseph a mouthpiece of piety here. His recognition of the provisional plan may well be admirable from the viewpoint of monotheistic faith, but there is no reason to assume that Joseph has lost the sense of his own brilliant initiative. In all that he has accomplished, and so when he says God, I don't know what that word is,
Elohim.
Elohim.
which could also suggest something more general like providence or fate. He also means Joseph, before you, is the first intimation that he intends the whole clan to come down to Egypt after him. Number 8, father to Pharaoh. The obvious meaning of father is authority, and there are biblical parallels for this sense of the term. It is a matter of debate among specialists whether the term also reflects an actual Egyptian administrative title. Joseph's characterization of his political power moves outward through concentric circles from Pharaoh to the court, all his house, to the whole land of Egypt. Number 9, thus says your son Joseph. This is the so-called messenger formula that is regularly used in biblical Hebrew as a kind of salutation to induce letters or orally conveyed messages. Number 10, in the land of Goshen. Land here obviously means a region, not a country. The area referred to is the rich pasture land of the Nile Delta, which would also be close to the border of the Sinai. In historical fact, Semitic nomads from the Sinai were granted permission by the Egyptian government to graze their flocks in this region. Number 11, lest you lose all. The Hebrew verb here has often been confused with another one, with which it shares 2 consonants, meaning to become poor. The literal meaning of the verb used by Joseph is to be inherited. That is, to lose all one's possessions, either through bankruptcy or being conquered by an enemy. Number 12, it is my very mouth that speaks to you. As Abraham, Ibn Ezra nicely observed, until the crucial moment when Joseph said, clear out everyone around me. All his communications with the brothers would have been through an interpreter, as we are reminded in chapter 42, verse 23. Now he has been speaking to them directly in their native Hebrew, a fact that may have barely assimilated in their dumbfounded condition. So he switched languages in mid-sentence, huh?
Yeah.
Basically. And they probably didn't even catch on at first. Yeah. But they were using an interpreter, is that correct?
Originally, yes. He had the interpreter speak to him in Egypt, and he spoke to Egyptian, and he spoke to the interpreter in Egypt. In Yeah, in Egyptian. The interpreter, everything would have gone through the interpreter up to this point where he switched over.
A fact that may have barely assimilated in their dumbfounded condition, and of which he reminds them now at the end of his speech as confirmation of his identity. Number 14, and he wept, and Benjamin wept. After the 3 times Joseph wept apart from his brothers, there is at least a mutual weeping in the reunion of the 2 sons of Rachel.
Can you imagine what it was like to be Benjamin in this? You're the pawn, but you have no idea what's going on. And you've gone from slavery to, hey, this is my brother. He's going to take care of me. That had to be, very emotional.
Well, now, did Benjamin was just a little boy when Joseph was sold into slavery, right?
Yeah.
So did he know the story of his older brother?
No,
No,
Oh,
he had
yes.
I'm sure he
had a
didn't.
brother.
I'm sure they kept it buried and hidden all the way to this point.
So he has a brother by a full brother, and this is his first knowledge of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting how Judah becomes the spokesperson for the clan, if you would, and he's the bloodline again of Christ, and that's really what we're following in all these stories. Okay.
Well, they can't all be in the bloodline, can they?
No, that's why, it normally it's supposed to go through the oldest, but as we see, it got changed. You got Jacob, who was the second, and then you have Judah here. Judah was what, the 5th? But then you watch it go back through and it follows the bloodline again.
But we go in and look at that first chapter of Matthew
Yeah,
where they talk about the bloodline.
yeah. But what you do is you go back to, remember Jesse? His
Yeah.
last son is David, his youngest.
Yeah.
And it wasn't his first son, but his last son that was chosen. And it's through David's bloodline also. He's the one where the promise was made that the Messiah would come from him. Oh,
Interesting. Who
Well,
came after Judah in the bloodline?
I have to go back to the book for that. I don't have the bloodline.
I'll have to refer to that.
Okay,
Did you want me to read on?
yeah, pick it up at footnote 15 then.
Okay, 15. And after that, his brothers spoke with him. The brothers' silence through Joseph's long speech is an eloquent expression of how overwhelmed they are by the amazing revelation. Only now, after he embraces them and weeps over them, are they able to speak. But the writer preserves the dramatic asymmetry between Joseph and his brothers by merely referring to their speaking without assigning actual dialogue to them. Number 18, the best of the land of Egypt. The source critics have noted an apparent contradiction with Joseph's instructions, which are to settle specifically in the region of Goshen. Unless one construes the best of the land as reference to that fertile area. And that Goshen is around the Nile Delta,
Yeah,
correct?
correct.
Okay. Something supported by chapter 47, verse 11. Live off the fat of the land. The Hebrew says literally, eat the fat of the land.
Okay. And that's what the sheep are gonna do, right?
Yeah, well, they're still going to be herders.
Yeah, they're not, and that's why they're kind of put over in Goshen. Because they're herders, and herders are looked down in Egyptian society, looked down upon. So,
Yeah, it's basically unclean.
yeah, and moving from herder to slave is, that's not surprising either in that respect.
So they end up back in slavery.
Well, they're not back in slaves, it's when they're put into slavery
Yeah.
after Joseph is gone. Okay, 19.
Okay, and you charge them. The Masoretic text has, and you singular are charged, which is a little incoherent in light of what follows. Both the Septuagint and the Vulgate read, charge them. Evidently, Joseph is enjoined by Pharaoh to transmit this royal directive to his brothers, conferring special status on their clan, the Nahum Zarna.
I think
Zarnia.
I think he's just simply quoting somebody there when he gives that.
Oh, that's okay. All right. Number 20, regret not your belongings. This literal meaning of the Hebrew idiom used is let not your eyes spare. That doesn't mean leave your belongings behind.
I think it does mean that.
Literally.
Leave your junk behind. You're
Yeah.
gonna get good stuff.
You got all the shit and things for your animals and the like there. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of you.
Well, they're getting 5 new sets of garments.
Yeah.
So that's probably a big step up for these herder type people. Yeah. Number 21. As Pharaoh had ordered, this reflects the Hebrew locution.
Locution.
Yeah, that means literally according to Pharaoh's mouth. Number 22, he gave changes of garments. Here we go. And to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver. The bestowal of garments, as Nahum Sarnia notes, is a kind of antithetical response to Joseph's having been stripped of his garment. The regal amount of silver given to Benjamin is the final gesture of restitution for the 20 pieces of silver the brothers took for the sale of Joseph. Number 23 as follows, because a whole list of items is being introduced, the narrator announces it with Kizot, a term prefaced to catalogs or inventories.
Catalogs of inventory. Catalogs.
Number 24, do not be perturbed on the journey. There has been some dispute about the meaning of the verb here. It is occasionally used in contexts that associate it with anger. And so many interpreters have imagined that Joseph is warning his brothers not to yield to mutual recrimination and perhaps fall to blows on the way home. but the primary meaning of the verb is to quake or to shake, either physically as a mountain in an earthquake or emotionally as a person trembling with fear. And it is the antonym of being tranquil or at peace. In all likelihood, Joseph is reassuring his brothers that they need not fear any lurking residue of vengefulness on his part that would turn the journey homeward into a trap. Number 26, his heart stopped. Translations like his heart fainted, in the King James Version, his heart was numb. Spicer and New Jewish Publication Society, and he was stunned. Revised English Bible. Blunt the force of the original. The Hebrew verb plainly means to stop, or more precisely, to intermit. Judah had warned that the loss of Benjamin would kill the old man. Now the tremendous shock of this news about Joseph, which at first he cannot believe, does he imagine his less than trustworthy sons are perpetrating a cruel hoax, induces a physical syncope.
A heart stopper.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Number 27, and they spoke to him all the words of Joseph, and he saw the wagons. Jacob's incredulity begins
Bible study.
to the circumstantial account of Joseph's own story that his sons gave him. Then he fully registers the presence of the wagon, which would have been oxen-drawn vehicles of a distinctive Egyptian design that would not normally be seen in Canaan, and that mere foreign buyers of grain would surely not be able to obtain. At this point, his spirit, no wonder he wanted them in new clothes, because they were projecting an image here. You got to look decent when you're pulling these Egyptian wagons that mere foreign buyers of grain would surely not be able to obtain. At this point, because people would really, if they had these old herding outfits on and they were pulling these really nice wagons, that's when people would start asking questions, and they would probably think that they stole them or something. At this point, his spirit revived, that is, came back to life. He emerges from the state of temporary heart failure or heart pause, triggered by the astounding report. One should note that the only hint of direct discourse given to the brothers in this scene is Joseph is still alive. Just 3 words, 4 syllables in the Hebrew. The effect is to keep them in the background, even though they are actually speaking to Jacob. Joseph looms in the foreground in the first half of the chapter, as does Jacob, the father from whom he has been so long separated in the second half. Number 28, Joseph, my son, is still alive. Let me go see him before I die. The wonderful poignancy of these words should not deflect us from noting that Jacob is again invoking a kind of self-defining motive. Even since Joseph's disappearance 22 years earlier in narrated time, he has been talking about going down to the grave. By now, he has in fact attained advanced old age. And so the idea that he has little time left is quite reasonable. The brief seizure he has just undergone is, of course, evidence of a physical frailty. Jacob's story, like David's, is virtually unique in ancient literature. in its searching representation of radical transformations a person undergoes in the slow course of time. The powerful young man who made his way across the Jordan to Mesopotamia with only his walking staff, who wrestled with stones and man and divine beings, is now an old man tottering on the brink of the grave, bearing the deep wounds of his long life.
So he waxed poetic there. We're already over time, but anything that you want to talk about before we close out?
I was just wondering, these stories about that delve into human nature, like Joseph and his brothers and Book of Job, are they unique to our scripture? Do other holy books and other religions do the same thing?
I don't study other holy books, so I can't answer that question. Hey, buddy, you got any answer to that?
Well, I think if I understand the question is, are these, could a critic say that these motifs are kind of reworked from universal themes? Is that what the question is?
Yeah.
And I mean, to respond to your question, I think where you might be coming from is you do see in other, holy traditions or ancient texts references to a flood or the flood. And you do see, even in Egyptian text, stories, legends about Osiris and godlike figures rising from the dead. So a lot of critics want to say, well, you have Osiris rising from the dead, you have Jesus rising from the dead, and this comes from that. But, as the old philosopher can tell you, that's bad scholarship. This and that, or this comes before. Just because something comes before something else doesn't mean it's the cause. I mean, that's bad logic, first of all. But yeah, you have the flood story, you have some figures coming back from the dead. But in terms of Joseph and his brothers, I'm not familiar with any. But while we're on the topic from last week about the Egyptians, I did a little research. The Egyptians were not leaders in metal technology. I got to correct myself. They actually borrowed a lot of their technology from their neighbors, the Greeks and the Syrians and people like that, the Hittites. They had, put all their energy into their building projects. And just briefly, there was a news article, some Egyptian jewelry belonging to Egyptian aristocrats was found a short distance outside Tel Aviv, just a few miles in a dig. And the article mentioned that the Egyptians had in fact physically ruled the Canaanites in the area for a long time. And there'd been at least two. The article mentioned plural, so I don't know how many. The Canaanites organized at least a couple of revolts against their Egyptian rulers. So, contrary to what I had thought for years, it wasn't just a token presence up there in Israel. According to these archaeologists, the Egyptians were there in force. The Canaanites resented it, and they fought back on at least a couple of occasions. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Okay. All right, let's close with prayer, and we'll pick this back up again next Wednesday. Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you for what we read today. We see your hand guiding and ruling and accomplishing that which you've set out to accomplish without the normal way that men would work, using fallible, sinful beings who will and accomplish that which is good. We pray that we might continue to be used by you to do your will. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.